"You'll never drive this road again." That's the first thing she shouted at me. Not quietly, not in passing, she screamed it like a verdict. Her name was Diane Wilkes, president of the Oak Hollow HOA, and she stood in the middle of the gravel lane with her hands on her hips like she owned not just the neighborhood but the whole county. Her two board members, Harold and Denise, flanked her on either side, nodding along like wind-up toys. And behind them, sparks flew from welding torches as a crew fastened steel beams into place, right across the only road to my farm. I just stood there for a second, boots still damp with morning dew, mud clinging from fixing a broken fence earlier. The smell of diesel from the cement mixer drifted through the humid air, mixing with the metallic sting of hot steel. My chest tightened as I watched that barricade slice me off from the rest of the county. For a moment, I honestly thought it was some kind of prank, but Diane smirked at me, pulled a folded paper from her clipboard, and shoved it into my hand. HOA membership application. Terms, dues, signatures required. She didn't even blink as she told me, "Join Oak Hollow or you won't set foot on this road again." It wasn't a request. It was extortion wrapped up in legal paper. My name is Jack Mercer. I spent 20 years as a military engineer, the kind of guy whose job was to find a way through or under any obstacle. Walls, rivers, minefields, I'd seen them all. When I retired, I thought I was leaving all that behind. I wanted peace. Land of my own, 60 acres just outside Oak Hollow, wide pasture, deep woods, and one dirt road that ran through their subdivision before reaching my front gate. I had my deed, my survey, ironclad. I made myself one promise when I bought that land. Nobody would tell me how to live again. But I overlooked one thing, that road. For decades, everyone had used it without issue, farmers, delivery trucks, even the county fire department. But the second Diane got herself elected HOA president, she saw dollar signs. She didn't see a road. She saw leverage. And the way she looked at me that morning with her sunglasses sliding down her nose and that smug little grin told me exactly what she thought. You'll fold like everyone else. She didn't know me yet. That first week, she made her move official. I came back from hauling feed to find a glossy notice taped to my gate. Thick paper, embossed HOA seal at the top like it was a royal decree. It said I had 7 days to join Oak Hollow or lose all access. No exceptions. Failure to comply will result in restricted roadway use. I read those words out loud on my porch, the crickets chirping in the background, the notice shaking in my hand. Restricted access. I whispered it to myself, the weight of it settling. That wasn't restriction. That was exile. That night, I sat in the creak of my rocking chair, staring at the road that wound away from my house and disappeared into the dark line of pines. A road that had felt like freedom when I bought this land now looked like a noose tightening around me. I could almost hear Diane's voice in the night, echoing her smugness. "You'll never drive this road again." The next morning, the war began. I woke to the grinding sound of machinery. At first, I thought a neighbor was clearing brush. But the longer I listened, the more deliberate it sounded, steel clanging, gravel shifting, something heavy being dropped into place. My dog started barking, packing along the porch. I pulled on my boots, brushed the dust from my jeans, and walked down toward the subdivision line. The sight made my stomach twist. A massive steel gate now stretched across the gravel. Fresh concrete footings still wet around the posts. Welding sparks lit the air. Exhaust from the cement truck rolled low and heavy, filling the morning haze. And there she was again, Diane, in a spotless white blouse, standing in the middle of it all like a queen at a coronation. She sipped iced tea from a glass tumbler while watching the crew finish her blockade. She saw me approach, but she didn't flinch, didn't wave, just gave me that same smirk as if this was all inevitable. I demanded an explanation, my voice cracking against the noise of the welding. She tilted her head slightly, the ice cubes in her glass clinking as she spoke sweetly. "Since you've chosen not to join our community, the board has voted to restrict your access." Her words dripped like honey, but the meaning was poison. I looked at that gate, motorized arm, reinforced steel, cement sunk 3 feet down, and I realized something. Diane wasn't trying to make me comply. She was trying to make me desperate, cornered, a man cut off from his own land. She thought she had me. But as the last sparks fizzled from the welder's torch, I made a quiet promise to myself. If Diane wanted a fight, then she just lit the fuse. The first weekend after they locked me out, the gate stood like a scar across the gravel road. It was overbuilt, the kind of thing you'd expect at a military base, not a sleepy subdivision. Steel beams welded tight. A motorized arm bolted into the ground. The smell of concrete still lingered, sharp and sour in the air. But Diane wasn't satisfied with just the gate. No, by Monday morning, she took it a step further. I woke to the sound of heavy equipment again, the low, grinding churn of a backhoe. At first, I thought maybe one of the farmers nearby was digging a drainage ditch. But as I walked toward the property line, dust clinging to my boots, the sound grew louder. And then I saw it. A trench. Right before the new gate, a backhoe was tearing up the gravel itself, scooping it into mounds on either side like a child building a moat around a sandcastle. The machine's bucket slammed into the earth, and each strike shook through my chest. I shouted at the crew, asking under what authority they were ripping up the road. One man's sunburned face, ball cap pulled low, just shrugged and pointed to Diane. And there she was again, sitting under a bright blue canopy she'd set up like it was a picnic. Wide-brimmed sun hat, sunglasses, a tall glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. She waved the glass at me in mock salute and said just 2 words that carried across the dust-filled air. Community improvements. My fists clenched. Improvements. She was turning the only road into a moat. Even if I cut through her padlock or rammed the gate, I'd be axle-deep in mud before I got 10 feet. And that's when it hit me, Diane wasn't just blocking me. She was declaring war. I called the sheriff's office. A deputy finally showed up late that afternoon, his patrol car rolling slow down the road, lights off. He was older, gray hair poking from under his hat, the kind of man who looked tired before he even stepped out of the car. He walked up to the trench, hands on his belt, and whistled low. Well, that's a mess. I shoved my deed in front of him, words tumbling out faster than I could control. This road has been used for decades, farmers, fire trucks, county workers. She can't just cut me off like this. It's my only way in or out. The deputy rubbed the back of his neck, looking at Diane, who hadn't even bothered to stand up. She just sipped her tea, smiling like she'd already won. Technically, he said carefully, the road belongs to the Oak Hollow HOA. It's private property. My voice cracked, so they can trap me on my own land. He sighed, it's complicated. If you can prove long-term open use or that your land is landlocked, the courts might recognize a right-of-way. But that takes time, months, maybe years. That word complicated stung worse than Diane's smirk. It was the law's way of saying, you're on your own. The deputy climbed back in his car, gave me a look that was almost apologetic, and drove off without so much as a warning to Diane. She raised her glass toward me again like it was a toast. I walked home that night in silence. Gravel crunched under my boots and every step sounded heavier. My dog trotted alongside me, ears perked, sensing the anger rolling off me. I didn't say a word. For the next few days, I improvised. I borrowed a buddy's dirt bike and carved a rough trail through the woods, roots, rocks, streams. It wasn't pretty, but it was enough to get me in and out. For supplies too heavy for the bike, I leaned on favors. An old friend from my service days flew in with a small helicopter, lowering pallets of feed and fuel directly into my pasture. When Diane saw that bird hovering over her subdivision, her face twisted. She called the sheriff again, filing complaints about unauthorized aerial disturbances. The sheriff tossed them straight in the trash. But Diane wasn't finished. Soon I started getting noise violation notices, HOA letters stamped with her signature. One accused me of running industrial equipment at midnight. Another said I damaged community property by driving near the gate. Fiction, all of it. And then came the certified letters, thick envelopes delivered one after another, threatening lawsuits and civil action. It was death by paperwork, and she was enjoying every second. One evening, I came back from town on the dirt bike. My headlights bounced wildly across the uneven trail. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. As I neared the subdivision line, I saw it, bright floodlights blasting over the gate, shadows stretched across the gravel. Diane stood with a dozen HOA loyalists, watching as the backhoe dug the trench even deeper. They weren't building a blockade anymore. They were building a fortress. I pulled off my helmet and just laughed, shaking my head. Diane spotted me. Her smile was poison as she shouted across the road, "Find another way home, Jack. This road belongs to Oak Hollow." I didn't answer, because in that moment a thought sparked in my mind. A crazy idea, one so bold it made me grin despite the rage boiling in my chest. If Diane wanted to dig down, fine, I'd go deeper. That night back in my workshop, I unrolled old blueprints I hadn't looked at since the Army. Field sketches of reinforced culverts, emergency bypass tunnels, shoring systems. My fingertips brushed the pencil lines, muscle memory rushing back. Building a tunnel wasn't just possible, it was my specialty. And suddenly the battle changed. The idea wouldn't let me sleep. That night I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, the old ceiling fan humming overhead, papers spread out across the wood grain like pieces of a battlefield map. My coffee had gone cold, but I kept sipping it anyway, more for the comfort of routine than the taste. Every time I looked at those sketches of culverts and shoring systems, I saw the gate in my mind. I saw Diane's smirk, and I knew what I had to do. By dawn, I was outside, boots sinking into damp soil, driving survey stakes into the ground. My dog followed me curiously, tail wagging, not knowing this wasn't just another fence repair. Each stake marked distance, slope, and angle. I paced it out carefully. The tunnel didn't need to be pretty, it just needed to get me under that road. Before I touched the first shovel, I did what I was trained to do, check for risk. I dialed 811, the call before you dig hotline. The operator confirmed what I hoped: no utilities ran under the subdivision's road. Nothing to stop me but dirt, rock, and Diane's arrogance. Still, this wasn't a one-man job, so I made some calls. By nightfall, two old friends pulled into my driveway, Mike Donovan and Eric Hale. We served together overseas, both of them steady as stone, the kind of men who didn't flinch under fire. When I explained what Diane had done, they didn't even hesitate. "You're telling me some HOA president built a moat to trap you?" Mike laughed, shaking his head. "Hell, that's a new one." Eric just grinned. "Guess we're back to digging again." So under cover of darkness, we started. At first, it was just pickaxes and shovels, the clank of steel on stone muffled by the thick summer air. We hauled dirt out in buckets, covering the piles with tarps and brush so no one would notice. Every scoop of soil was a small victory, every plank we set against the wall a step closer to freedom. We kept the tunnel low and tight, reinforced with scrap steel and plywood we scavenged from local yards. A salvage generator powered a fan rig we rigged with ductwork, keeping air moving through the narrow passage. The smell of damp earth mixed with the oil tang of the generator, clinging to our clothes by morning. It was brutal work. My shoulders ached, my hands blistered, but each night as I crawled out covered in mud, I felt a strange satisfaction. Diane thought she had me trapped. She had no idea I was tunneling right under her nose. During the day, she strutted around the gate, clipboard in hand, barking orders at the crew like a general. I caught glimpses of her as I passed on the dirt bike, her sunglasses glinting, her lips pressed into that poisonous smile. She thought she'd checkmated me. But every night, the tunnel grew longer. By the end of the second week, we'd made real progress. The walls were braced, the gravel bed kept the floor dry, and the fan hummed steadily. The tunnel wasn't glamorous. The beams creaked sometimes, and the light bulbs flickered, but it held. Meanwhile, Diane doubled down on her side. She started patrolling the gate herself, shouting threats at delivery drivers, even turning away the county trash truck one morning. I heard later that the sanitation worker cursed her out so loud half the neighborhood came to their windows. But Diane didn't care. Control was oxygen to her, and she was suffocating on it. That's when I realized this fight wasn't just about me anymore. One evening, as we worked late, headlights appeared at the edge of my pasture. My dog barked furiously until I waved a flashlight toward the fence. A pickup rolled up, and two neighbors stepped out, Tom Jacobs and his wife, Ruth, farmers from the far side of Oak Hollow. "You really building a tunnel?" Tom asked, eyes wide. Sure am, I said, wiping mud from my brow. His grin spread slow and wide. Good, about damn time somebody stood up to her. That night, over thermoses of coffee, they told me their own stories. Fines for hay bales visible from the road. Threats over tractor noise. Accusations about livestock smells. They weren't even members of Oak Hollow, but Diane had been reaching her claws further every year. By the weekend, more neighbors started showing up. Retired vets, local handymen, even a high school kid named Ethan who wanted to practice welding. We worked in shifts, digging and bracing, hauling dirt in wheelbarrows disguised with tarps. Every scoop of soil became another act of defiance. And Diane, she only got worse. She installed security cameras around the gate, certain I'd eventually try to ram it with my truck. She hired a security guard, some 20-year-old college kid with aviator sunglasses and a fake badge he bought online. He spent more time scrolling his phone than guarding anything. At HOA meetings, she spun elaborate stories about me, said I was reckless, dangerous, a threat to their safety. But even her own residents were starting to whisper. In a small town, word spreads fast, and people were beginning to see her blockade for what it was, tyranny in a pressed blouse. I knew then I needed to document everything. So I set up motion-activated cameras along my fence line. They caught footage of the trench deepening, of workers reinforcing the barricade, of Diane packing like a hawk with her clipboard. I archived every certified letter, every fake violation, every laughable threat. If this went to court, I'd be ready. But the turning point came one stormy night. Thunder rattled the windows, rain hammered the tin roof. Around midnight, I saw flashing lights through the trees, an ambulance parked helplessly at the trench. A neighbor, an older man with heart problems, had collapsed. The paramedics couldn't reach his house because of Diane's barricade. I sprinted through the mud, shouting that I had a way. We loaded their gear onto my dirt bike trailer and hauled it through my rough trail in the woods. By the time we reached him, precious minutes had been lost. He survived, but just barely. And standing there in the storm, watching the paramedics work, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. Diane's games weren't just cruel, they were dangerous. And that night, my tunnel stopped being an escape route. It became a mission. I don't think I've ever worked harder for something that wasn't a paycheck or a mission. The tunnel became my obsession. Days blurred into nights, my hands calloused, my back stiff, mud caked under my nails no matter how much I scrubbed. But with every board braced and every bucket hauled out, I could feel the end coming closer. By the end of the second week, we had it. A reinforced passage running clean under Oak Hollow's trench and gate, wide enough for my truck, tall enough that I didn't have to crawl. We lined the walls with timber, bolted steel braces at weak points, laid gravel across the floor to drain off water. A string of bare bulbs hummed along the ceiling, fed by a generator that coughed and rattled but kept the air moving. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't supposed to be, it was functional, safe, strong. One night, crouched at the far end, I brushed away the last bit of dirt and felt the cool air of the county road on my face. I couldn't help but laugh. After weeks of Diane's posturing and threats, here I was slipping under her entire fortress like a ghost. We tested it first with the dirt bike. Eric rode through slow, headlights bouncing off the braces, gravel crunching under his tires. The tunnel groaned but held. Then we tried the truck. I gripped the wheel, my heart pounding, and eased forward. The beams creaked, the engine echoed in the confined space, but the tunnel didn't waver. 100 feet later, daylight split through the exit. I rolled onto the county road, killed the engine, and sat there in silence. For the first time in weeks, I was free. But I knew freedom wasn't enough. This wasn't just about me getting out. This was about exposing Diane, showing the whole county what her obsession had turned into. So I set up cameras, motion-activated, angled on both ends of the tunnel, positioned to capture her face when she realized. I even rigged a spotlight on a timer aimed right at the gate. If I was going to beat her, I wanted proof carved in pixels and light. The reveal came at dawn. I barely slept the night before, packing my porch while the crickets sang in the fields. By sunrise, I had my truck positioned at the tunnel mouth, engine idling low. My hands gripped the wheel, sweat slicking my palms despite the cool morning air. This wasn't a firefight, but my nerves felt the same. I shifted into drive. The tunnel swallowed me whole, headlights cutting through the shadows, walls pressing close like a ribcage. The hum of the fan blended with the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. And then daylight. I burst out onto the county road, past the trench, past the steel gate, like a ghost walking through walls. I parked on the shoulder, stepped out, and leaned against the hood, arms folded, chin high, waiting. It didn't take long. Diane showed up minutes later as if she'd sensed something. Clipboard in hand, hair styled like she was headed for a magazine cover. She tapped on her phone, probably drafting another fake violation. And then she saw me. Her head jerked up, sunglasses sliding down her nose. She froze, staring at me on the wrong side of her fortress. Her jaw slackened. She glanced at the gate, at the trench, then back at me. "How?" she sputtered. I smiled, mourning Diane. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the ground until she saw it, a faint mound of disturbed dirt just yards from her moat. The tunnel mouth. The realization hit her like a punch. "No," she whispered, rushing forward, heels stabbing into the gravel. She dropped to her knees, clawing at the dirt with manicured nails, muttering, "No, no, no." And then she erupted. She hurled her clipboard into the air, screeched so loud it echoed off the pines, stomped her heels into the ground like a child throwing a tantrum. My cameras caught it all, the meltdown of Oak Hollow's queen, unraveling in broad daylight. By noon, the footage was online. I uploaded it everywhere: local forums, neighborhood groups, Facebook pages where gossip traveled faster than weather warnings. Within hours, people were sharing it countywide. By nightfall, it had spread beyond. The comments poured in. Laughter, memes, "Tunnel man beats HOA Confessionals." Screenshots of Diane ranting in group chats demanding the video be taken down, as if anyone could stop the internet once it sank its teeth in. And just like that, Diane's fortress crumbled. Her board members, once her loyal shadows, started to distance themselves. The treasurer resigned. Harold, her right-hand yes-man, suddenly stopped showing up to her meetings. Even her loyalists whispered that maybe she'd gone too far. But Diane wasn't the type to surrender. No, she doubled down. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door with a thick envelope in hand. Inside, a lawsuit. The Oak Hollow HOA, represented by Diane Wilkes, was accusing me of destruction of community infrastructure, illegal tunneling under private property, and endangering residents. I laughed when I read it. Illegal tunneling. She made it sound like I'd built a subway system, but I knew better than to underestimate paperwork. Because Diane hadn't lost, not in her mind, she'd just changed battlefields. And now I was headed for a war not of dirt and steel, but of paper and law. The lawsuit landed on my kitchen table with a thud. I sat there staring at the stack of papers, the HOA seal printed at the top of every page, Diane's name signed neatly at the bottom. It was like she'd found a new weapon, not gates, not trenches, but paperwork sharp enough to cut a man to pieces. The accusations were wild. Destruction of community infrastructure, unauthorized excavation, endangerment of residents. Reading it, you'd think I'd built a minefield under Oak Hollow, not a tunnel strong enough to drive a truck through. I laughed at first, but then the reality sank in. Lawsuits mean time, money, court dates, stress that doesn't let you sleep at night. Diane wasn't just trying to stop me, she wanted to bleed me dry. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the kitchen, and whispered to myself, "She's not finished, not by a long shot." But neither was I. Word of the video had spread faster than wildfire. People I'd never met started reaching out. Emails, phone calls, handwritten letters slipped into my mailbox. Folks who'd lived through their own HOA nightmares. One couple said they'd been fined $200 for leaving their Christmas lights up until January 2nd. A man told me he'd nearly lost his house because of unapproved lawn ornaments. Gnomes, of all things. These weren't isolated stories. They were patterns, tyranny dressed up as bylaws. And when they saw someone finally push back, they wanted in. Donations trickled into a legal fund. Local attorneys offered free hours. Even a retired judge sent me a letter reminding me of something I'd nearly forgotten. If your property is landlocked, the law recognizes your right of ingress and egress. No HOA can erase that. I took that letter and pinned it to my wall, right above the blueprints of the tunnel. It became my new battle map. That's when I met Rebecca Sloan. She was a local attorney, sharp as a blade and calm as a pond. The first time she walked into my kitchen, she didn't waste time. She scanned the lawsuit, her lips tightening into a smirk. "They're calling it illegal tunneling?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, "like I'm building a subway system." She chuckled, then tapped the paper with her pen. "This isn't strong. They're hopping to scare you into settling, but with the right evidence, we can turn this around." I handed her the binders I'd been keeping, certified letters, violation notices, photos of the trench, recordings from my cameras. She flipped through them, eyebrows raising higher with each page. "You're meticulous," she said finally. 20 years in the service will do that." Rebecca closed the binder with a snap. "Good, because this isn't just a defense, this is an offense. We're going to hit them harder than they hit you." We filed a countersuit. Harassment, obstruction of property access, reckless endangerment. Exhibit A, the ambulance delay. Exhibit B, Diane's letters. Exhibit C, video of the trench itself. Each piece of evidence stacked higher and heavier until it felt like we were building a wall of truth that no gate could block. But the real bombshell came from the inside. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the last glow of daylight fade behind the pines, a car pulled up to the edge of my fence. Out stepped Denise Harper, one of Diane's own board members. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder like she didn't want anyone seeing her there. "I can't keep doing this," she said softly. "She's gone too far." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside were printed emails, internal HOA correspondence. In them, Diane bragged openly about her strategy. Leverage access until Mercer complies. Make him desperate enough to fold. Extortion, in her own words. When Rebecca read them, she smiled for the first time in days. She just handed us Exhibit D. Still, Diane didn't slow down. If anything, she spun harder. She hired another so-called security guard, a kid barely out of college who strutted around with aviators and a fake badge. She put up motion sensors and floodlights near the gate, convinced I'd ram it with a truck. She held HOA meetings where she ranted about me building a militia underground. But she was unraveling. The cracks showed one stormy Thursday afternoon. My cameras picked up Diane standing at the gate with a bullhorn, shouting at delivery drivers who dared idle near the trench. "Trespassers will be prosecuted," she shrieked. Most drivers turned around, but one didn't. A UPS guy with no patience for HOA drama parked his truck, grabbed his packages, and started hauling them across the mud. Diane went ballistic, screaming, threatening to call federal authorities. The driver snapped back, loud enough for my camera mic to catch it. "Lady, I am federal." That clip went viral overnight. Thousands watched Diane sputter helplessly, her voice drowned out by the sound of tape ripping across cardboard. Rebecca filed it as Exhibit E. But the moment that shook me most wasn't funny. It was deadly serious. One evening, Tom Jacobs called me in a panic. His wife had gone into labor unexpectedly. The ambulance was delayed, again, at Diane's barricade. He begged me to help. I didn't hesitate. I guided the EMTs through the tunnel, headlights bouncing off the beams as they barreled through to the Jacobs farmhouse. Hours later, a baby girl was born safe and sound. A week later, Tom handed me a card. On the front, a photo of his newborn daughter. Inside, scrawled in his rough handwriting, "You saved her first breath." That became Exhibit F, and nothing. Not gates, not lawsuits, not smirks behind sunglasses, carried more weight than that. By late summer, Rebecca told me it was only a matter of time before we faced Diane in court. "She's going to fight dirty," she warned. "But she's not as smart as she thinks she is. Let her rant. Let her lose control. Judges hate theatrics." I nodded, staring at the binders stacked on my kitchen counter. They weren't just paperwork anymore. They were ammunition. Diane thought she'd broken me. but all she'd done was unite the county against her. And when the day came, I was ready to walk into that courtroom with the truth in my hands. Because Diane Wilkes had built a wall, and I dug right through it. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and old paper, the kind of smell that clings to history, like every argument, every ruling, every broken life had soaked into the walls. I walked through the doors in a clean shirt, shoulders squared, trying to project calm, even though my stomach churned like a washing machine. Reporters crowded the steps outside, snapping photos and tossing questions. "Mr. Mercer, how did you build the tunnel? Do you regret defying the HOA?" I kept my answers short. Not for a second. Inside, the echo of footsteps on tile followed me down the corridor, Rebecca at my side, carrying binders thick as bricks. We stepped into the courtroom, and there she was, Diane Wilkes. Sitting at the plaintiff's table, pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights, lips pressed so tightly they looked like a thin scar. Her lawyer, a slick-looking man in a wrinkled suit, leaned close, whispering frantically. But Diane didn't look at him. She locked her eyes on me, unblinking, like she thought she could burn holes through my chest with a stare. I didn't flinch. I'd faced worse. The judge entered, a tall man with steel-gray hair and the kind of voice that made the room fall silent with just a word. "Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association versus Jack Mercer," he announced, eyes scanning the docket. "Let's proceed." Diane's lawyer went first. He puffed himself up like he was about to save the free world, then launched into a speech about community integrity and protecting residents from dangerous, unauthorized activity. He painted me as some rogue operator, tunneling recklessly under their private road, endangering property values and public safety. At one point, he even muttered the word eco-terrorist. I heard muffled laughter ripple through the gallery. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She didn't posture, didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the facts like bricks on a foundation. My land was landlocked. The road through Oak Hollow had been openly used for decades. Diane's blockade wasn't just petty, it was unlawful. Rebecca explained easement law in plain English, quoting precedents without a shred of drama. "If a property has no other access," she told the judge, "the owner has a legal right of ingress and egress, regardless of who technically owns the road." Then she projected the first piece of evidence on a screen, Diane's own emails. Her words in black and white, "Leverage access until Mercer complies." The gallery gasped. Diane's lips twitched, and for the first time I saw cracks in her mask. Testimony began. I went first. Rebecca guided me through my background, my time as a military engineer, my purchase of the land, and my reliance on that road. I told the judge about the gate, the trench, the night the ambulance couldn't reach my neighbor. I described hauling paramedics through the woods on my dirt bike trailer, the rain pouring down, every minute ticking like a hammer on an anvil. The judge's pen paused mid-note. He looked up, his eyes lingering on me longer than they had on anyone else so far. That detail landed exactly where it needed to. Then it was Diane's turn. She strode to the stand with her chin lifted like she was still the queen of Oak Hollow. But the confidence cracked quick. Rebecca's questions sliced clean. "Did you approve the trench?" "Yes." "Did you consider the impact on emergency vehicles?" "Irrelevant," Diane snapped. "Were the emails authentic?" "Taken out of context," she stammered, shifting in her chair. By the third contradiction, the judge's patience was visibly thinning. But the highlight came when Rebecca asked, calm as a whisper, "Ms. Wilkes, are you aware of the National Fire Protection Association standards requiring unobstructed access for emergency vehicles?" Diane smirked. "Those don't apply to us, we're a private community." The room erupted, gasps, whispers. The judge's gavel slammed against the block. "Order," he barked, but the damage was done. Over the next 2 days, witness after witness stepped forward. The UPS driver who'd gone viral testified, still smirking as he recalled Diane screaming at him for doing his job. "Lady, I am federal," he said again, earning muffled laughter from the gallery. Then Tom Jacobs, the farmer whose wife had gone into labor. He held up a photo of his newborn daughter, voice trembling as he said, "If not for that tunnel, my girl might not be here." Silence swept the room. The weight of it hung heavy, and even Diane's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Her side tried to paint the tunnel as unsafe, a ticking time bomb. But Rebecca came prepared. She laid out blueprints, soil analysis, and photos of the reinforced braces. "This structure," she said firmly, "was built to higher standards than most county culverts." The judge nodded slowly, tapping his pen against the bench. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the outcome felt like it was already carved in stone. Diane's lawyer rambled about protecting property values. Rebecca stood tall, crisp, and deliberate. "This case isn't about bylaws," she said. "It's about abuse of power. The HOA took a road and turned it into a weapon. They endangered lives, fabricated violations, and sought to extort a landowner into compliance. The law doesn't support tyranny, Your Honor. It never has, and it never will." The room went silent. Every head turned toward the bench. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers, his gaze shifting from Diane to me. "I've heard enough," he said at last. His voice was calm, but the weight of it filled the room like thunder. And in that moment, I knew the war wasn't decided by gates or trenches anymore. It was decided by truth. The judge's voice carried the kind of authority you don't argue with. The gallery leaned forward as he set his glasses down and spoke slowly, each word a hammer striking steel. The actions of the Oak Hollow HOA were reckless, malicious, and in direct violation of Mr. Mercer's rights. This court recognizes his easement and grants him permanent, unrestricted access to his property via the Oak Hollow Road. The air in the room shifted. Gasps, murmurs, a collective exhale from the neighbors who had sat quietly through weeks of tension, but the judge wasn't finished. "The gate and trench are to be removed immediately at the HOA's expense. Furthermore, due to evidence of harassment and endangerment, the Oak Hollow HOA is ordered to pay damages in the amount of $25,000, including attorney fees." My chest tightened, but not from fear. Relief washed over me, heavier than anything I'd felt in years, and then came the final blow. "Ms. Wilkes," the judge said, turning his gaze directly at her, "you are personally fined $2,500 for abuse of authority, and you are hereby removed from your position as HOA president effective immediately." Diane's face drained of color. She looked like someone had pulled the plug on her. Her lawyer slumped back in his chair, staring at the table. Around us, neighbors stifled cheers, some covering their mouths, others grinning openly. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones in my face, cameras flashing. "How does it feel to win?" one asked. I glanced back at the doors where Diane still sat frozen, and I said simply, "It feels like justice." But I knew the real satisfaction would come later. 3 days after the ruling, the county sent crews to Oak Hollow Road. I stood with my arms crossed at the edge of the pasture as trucks rumbled in. Sparks flew as welders cut through the steel beams Diane had paraded as her crown jewel. A bulldozer filled the trench, dirt pouring in like water, filling a hole, until the road looked the way it should have always looked, simple gravel leading home. Neighbors gathered to watch. Some clapped. One farmer chuckled, shaking his head. "Funny how fast a queen loses her castle." Diane didn't show up. Rumor had it she was holed up in her house with the blinds drawn, unable to face the laughter outside. By the next week, Oak Hollow held an emergency election. For the first time in years, people showed up in droves, eager to vote. They chose Ellen Drake, a soft-spoken schoolteacher with no appetite for drama. Her first act as president, a public apology for Diane's misuse of authority. But Diane's humiliation didn't end with politics. Local newspapers ran headlines like HOA president ousted after tunnel showdown. The viral video of her meltdown at the gate resurfaced again and again. Memes spread online, Diane photoshopped as a medieval guard on a drawbridge, shouting "No entry." I even spotted a t-shirt at the feed store with a cartoon tunnel and the words, "Miles ahead of the HOA." Wherever she went, whispers followed. At the grocery store, I overheard a clerk snicker when she fumbled her wallet. At the post office, someone muttered, "That's the tunnel lady." Once, outside the bank, I saw her slam her car door and break down crying after a passerby shouted, "Hey, Karen, dug any ditches lately?" Meanwhile, life in Oak Hollow shifted. Without Diane's shadow looming, people relaxed. Lawns grew naturally instead of being shaved to regulation height. Kids left bikes in driveways without fear of fines. Porch lights flickered late into the night, laughter spilling out instead of worry. For the first time since I'd moved there, it felt like a community. To celebrate, I organized what I half-jokingly called the Liberation Cookout. Flyers went up around town, celebrating freedom from HOA tyranny, all welcome except Diane. That line alone set the whole county buzzing. On the day of the cookout, my pasture came alive. Grills smoking with barbecue, kids racing four-wheelers, a local band playing country tunes from the back of a flatbed. Neighbors brought pies, veterans showed up with flags, even the sheriff stopped by to shake my hand. At the entrance of the old tunnel, I unveiled a welded sign made by a local metal worker, the Wilkes Passage, in memory of petty tyrants everywhere. The crowd roared with laughter. People snapped photos, teenagers filmed TikToks walking through the tunnel, narrating, "This is where Karen lost the war." It went viral within hours. And sure enough, Diane couldn't resist driving by. Her car crawled slow down the road she once tried to own. She saw the banner strung high, "No more Gates, no more Queens." She saw her former neighbors, people who once sat silent at her meetings, now cheering around my bonfire. And most of all, she saw me standing at the tunnel entrance, beer in hand, raising it in a mock salute. Her car sped off, tires spitting gravel. By the next month, a "for sale" sign appeared in her yard. She couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't live in the place where her reign had turned into ridicule. Rumor had it she moved to a suburb 3 counties over where nobody knew her name. As for me, I finally had what I came here for: peace. Trucks rumbled down Oak Hollow Road again without issue. The UPS driver honked every time he passed, giving me a thumbs up. The Jacobs baby girl toddled across my porch one afternoon, her mother hugging me in tears again. Even the fire marshal sent me a note, glad to see sanity restored. Roads are for safety, not power games. The tunnel remained, not because I needed it anymore, but because it stood as a symbol. People came to see it, snapping photos, treating it like a landmark. I started charging $5 a tour, funneling the money into a community fund for local farmers. To my surprise, people lined up. Diane wanted obedience. What she created instead was unity. And as I watched neighbors laugh, kids chasing fireflies across the field at dusk, the sign over the tunnel glowing under the spotlight, I realized this fight had never been just about me. It was about everyone who's ever been boxed in, pushed around, told they had no choice. And for the first time in months, I knew the fight was worth every bruise, every shovel of dirt, every sleepless night. Because sometimes the only way forward is to dig your own way out. Some nights I still walk the length of that tunnel. Not because I need to anymore, the road's open, clear, and free, but because the air down there, cool and heavy with the smell of earth, reminds me of something I'll never forget. Freedom doesn't come easy. Sometimes you have to dig for it. I run my hand along the wooden braces, scarred with shovel marks, stained with sweat and mud. Every board is a memory of long nights with Mike and Eric hauling dirt in buckets, of Tom showing up with his old wheelbarrow after his daughter was born, of that high school kid Ethan welding braces with shaky hands but steady eyes. This tunnel wasn't just mine, it belonged to all of us. Diane Wilkes thought she was punishing me, but what she really did was unite a community. People who barely spoke to each other at HOA meetings came together in my pasture to fight back. They shared stories, broke bread, and remembered what it felt like to stand on the same side of something. Funny how a trench meant to divide us ended up bringing us closer. Life settled after she left. The "for sale" sign disappeared from her yard, her house bought by a young couple who wasted no time planting wildflowers out front. The new HOA leadership under Ellen Drake quietly dissolved half the bylaws Diane had clung to. "Nobody needs a citation for leaving their trash can out overnight," Ellen said with a laugh at her first meeting. The whole room erupted in applause. For the first time, Oak Hollow looked like a neighborhood instead of a fortress. But me, I wasn't the same man who'd walked into that fight. At first, I thought it was about stubbornness, about refusing to bow. But as the months passed, I realized it went deeper. It was about principle. About standing up when someone in power decides they can play God with your life. About saying no, not with anger, not with violence, but with resolve. There were quiet moments that stuck with me. One afternoon, I sat on my porch when Tom walked up, his baby girl in his arms. He handed her to me, and she grabbed my finger with a grip stronger than you'd expect from someone so small. "This is Emma," he said softly. "She's here because you wouldn't give up." I didn't know what to say. I just held her, feeling that tiny heartbeat, and understood that this whole mess wasn't just about land or law. It was about lives. Another time, Ruth Jacobs baked me a pie and left it on my porch with a note that read, "Sometimes the strongest fences are built between neighbors who trust each other." Simple words, but truer than any bylaw Diane ever scribbled. The county kept the tunnel as a curiosity. Kids on field trips toured it like a museum exhibit. Farmers stopped by to shake my hand. Strangers thanked me in the feed store, some calling me the tunnel man with a grin. At first, it embarrassed me. But over time, I realized it wasn't about me at all. It was about hope, proof that one person could push back and win. Diane, last I heard, she was living in a quiet subdivision 3 counties away, keeping her head down. Maybe she'd learned something, maybe not, but I didn't think about her much anymore. She wasn't the point. The point was what we built in the ashes of her control. Neighbors checking on each other, shared harvest festivals, kids riding their bikes without fear of fines, a road open to everyone who needed it just as it should have always been. And me sitting on my porch at sunset, watching the light stretch across my fields, finally feeling at peace. Sometimes I wonder if people watching this will think it's just a story about an HOA gone mad. But it's not. It's about every moment in life when someone tries to put a gate in front of you, dig a trench to trap you, build walls to keep you small. It's about choosing not to surrender. Because freedom doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's a shovel in your hands at midnight. Sometimes it's a binder of paperwork stacked higher than your patience. Sometimes it's just holding on when every voice tells you to quit. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like mud under your nails, sweat on your back, and the quiet knowledge that you didn't let someone else write your story. I walk out to the pasture sometimes, where the grass has grown thick over the filled-in trench. The place where Diane tried to build a wall now looks like nothing ever happened. Birds perch on the fence posts, the wind whistles through the pines, and the road stretches out straight and clear. And I smile because I know. You can build gates, you can dig trenches, you can write bylaws and scream into bullhorns, but you can't bury truth, you can't bury determination. Because sooner or later, the ground gives way. And those who dig deep enough, those who refuse to stop, they'll always find a way out. Always. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.